Hi everybody, Ray's Reading Corner here. This is just a web series where we're going to be reading books, adult books, kids books, baby books, whatever. Get everybody interested in reading. I have a special guest today. Her name is, what's your name?
Belle.
Belle? What are you doing in that outfit? Is it bedtime? It's bedtime. It's bedtime for Belle. So today we're going to be reading another chapter from what book?
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast. Let's show them the cover.
Live action.
The live action, that's right, from your movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. From your movie. So we did the prologue last episode. So this time we're going to do chapter 1. You're doing chapter 1, Belle? Are you getting sleepy?
No, my eyes are itchy.
Your eyes are itchy. Eyes are itchy. Is the beast getting your eyes itchy?
I don't know.
You ready? Okay. Stop eating your hair, Belle. Okay. Belle opened the front door of her cottage, taking in the picture-perfect pastoral scene in front of her. She sighed. Morning in the small village of Veneuve, I'm going to get the name wrong, of course, began the same way each day. At least it had for as long as Belle had lived there. Did you live there a long time? Yeah. The sun would rise slowly over the horizon, its rays turning the field that surrounded the village more green or gold or white, depending on the season. Then the rays would move along until they touched the whitewashed sides of Belle's cottage, which stood right on the outskirts of the village, before finally illuminating the thatched roofs of the homes and shops that made up the village itself. By the time the villagers themselves, by the time that happened, like I said, I get these things wrong sometimes, the villagers themselves would be stirring, preparing for the day. Inside their homes, men would sit down for their morning meals, while the women readied the children or finished stirring the porridge. Did you eat porridge? You have? Okay. The village would be hushed, and those still shaking off sleep. Then the clock on the church would strike 8, and just like that, the village would come alive. Belle had watched it happen hundreds of times. Yet this morning, like every morning, it still amazed her as she stared down at the little town full of the same people going about their daily routines. Narrowing her warm brown eyes, she sighed at the mundanity of it all. She often wondered what it would be like to wake up differently. Belle shook her head. It did her no good to wonder or wish. It was life as she had always known it, the life she had shared with her papa ever since they had moved from Paris many years earlier. It was a waste of time to dwell on the past or what-ifs. She had things to do, errands to run, and she looked down at the book clutched in her hand, a new adventure to find. Do you like reading? You do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Have you been to Paris? You have? I've been to Paris. It's fun. Straightening her shoulders, Belle pulled the door closed behind her and set off into town. Within minutes, Belle was making her way down the cobblestone main street. As she passed other villagers, she nodded distantly. While she had lived in the village most of her life, she still felt like a stranger there. It, like so many in the rural French countryside, was isolated and insular. Do you know what that means? It means it was far away from a lot of people. Most of the people Belle passed on her way had been born there, and most would spend the rest of their lives there. To them, the village was the world, and outsiders were viewed with caution. Belle wasn't entirely sure that even if she had been born in the village, she wouldn't still have been treated as an outsider. She really didn't have much in common with most of the others. And if she was being honest, she tended to enjoy reading more than idle small talk, traveling to distant lands and having wondrous adventures, even if only in the pages of her favorite books. Weaving her way through the streets, gotta turn the page. She listened to the rest of the villagers as they greeted each other. She felt a pang of loneliness watching them talk to one another. They all seemed perfectly content with the monotony of their morning routines. No one seemed to share her desire for something new and exciting. for something more. Do you want to go to far-off places, Belle?
Mm.
Yeah? What's a place you'd like to visit?
Beast's Castle.
Beast's Castle. Ooh, that sounds like fun. Belle reached the baker's stand, the sweet smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. As always, the hurried baker was holding a tray of freshly made baguettes and muttering to himself. Bonjour, Belle said. The man nodded absently. One baguette. Belle peered at the row of jars filled with rich red jam. Do you like jam? Yeah. So do I. And this too, s'il vous plaît. Do you know what that means?
Mm-mm.
Please. S'il vous plaît, please.
Okay.
She said, picking one up and sliding it into her apron pocket. After she'd paid and collected her goods, she moved on to complete her next errand. She was just about to turn a corner when she paused. Jean, the old potter, was standing next to his mule, looking confused. The cart attached to the mule was loaded with freshly made pottery. Looking up, Jean caught Belle watching him and smiled. Good morning, Belle, he said, his voice scratchy with age. He was peering into his cart, a puzzled expression on his face. Good morning, Monsieur Jean, Belle said in return. Have you lost something again? Did you ask him that? Yeah. The older man nodded. I believe I have. Problem is, I can't remember what. He said sadly. Then he shrugged. Well, I'm sure it'll come to me. He turned and pulled on the mule's reins, trying to lead the stubborn animal away. The mule was having none of it. He tried to stick his nose in Belle's pocket, searching for the apple she had hidden there, just in case she ran into Jean. Giving the creature a hard yank, Jean succeeded in drawing the mule's attention away from Belle. But he also succeeded in knocking the cart off balance. Gasping, Belle reached out and grabbed one of the beautiful clay pots just before it fell. Then, satisfied nothing else would fall, she gave the mule the apple and turned to leave. Where are you off to? Jean asked. She looked back at her shoulder. To return this book to Peter Robert, she said, smiling and holding up the well-worn book. It's about two lovers in far Verona. Are either of them potters? Jean interrupted. Belle shook her head. No. Sounds boring, he said. Does that sound boring?
No.
No? You like reading?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I've asked you that before. Belle sighed. She wasn't surprised by Jean's reaction. It was the same reaction she got any time she mentioned books, or art, or travel, or Paris. Anything other than talk of the village or the villagers was met with indifference, or worse, disdain. Do you know what that means?
Got stained?
No. Good try, but no. It means that they really didn't care for what she was talking about.
Oh.
Yeah. It's like how I talk about my Transformers. Nobody really cares about them except me. Just once, Belle thought as she patted Jean's mule on the nose and gave the potter a wave goodbye, I'd like to meet someone who wanted to hear the story of Romeo and Juliet, or any story for that matter. She started to walk more quickly, more eager than ever to get to Père Robert's and get a new book and return home. At least in her own cottage, she had no one to bother her or judge her. She could just get lost in her stories and imagine the world beyond the provincial town, absorbed in thought of what new bookish delights might be awaiting her at Père Robert's. Belle didn't even notice the attention she was getting, nor did she pay any mind to the barely concealed comments her presence sparked. She had heard them all before. It was not the first time she had passed by the school and heard the young boys call her strange. The washerwomen, their hands pruned and covered in suds, also loved to whisper among themselves whenever they saw Belle. Funny girl, they would say. Doesn't fit in, was another favorite. To the gossipy women, this was the worst offense of all. It never occurred to them that Belle chose not to be part of the crowd. Are you a funny girl?
Not to me.
Not to you? Do you think you fit in with the villagers? Do you?
I think I do.
You think you do? Okay. Finally, Belle arrived at her destination, the vestry of the church. Vestry of the church. Oh boy, I'm bad today. Pushing open the doors, she breathed a sigh of relief as the quiet and serenity of the building enveloped her. The hubbub and noise of the outside faded away, and for the first time that morning, Belle felt at peace. Hearing her enter, a kind man in a long black robe looked up from his book. The man was tall and slender, with warm eyes that crinkled as he smiled at Belle. Oh, I made him a she.
I'm going to put that back on here.
Good morning, Belle, Pierre Robert greeted her. So where did you run off to this week? Belle smiled in return. The well-read priest was one of two people in the entire village Belle felt she could talk to. The other person was her father. 2 cities in northern Italy, she answered, her tone growing animated. She held out the book as if showing Pierre Robert would somehow help bring the story fully to life. You should have seen it. The castles, the art. There was even a masquerade ball. Do you know what that is?
Beast's ballroom.
Sorta. It's like a dance where everyone wears masks.
I knew that.
Almost like a Halloween party.
Oh, yeah.
Reaching out, Pierre Robert took the books gingerly from Belle. He nodded as she continued to tell him the story of Romeo and Juliet, as though he had never heard it before, even though they both knew they had read the story at least a dozen times himself. It was just part of their ritual. When she was done, Belle took a deep, satisfied breath. Have you got any new places to go? She asked hopefully. She turned, and her eyes lingered on the town's library. Calling it a library was an exaggeration, to say the least. A few dozen books lined 2 small, dusty bookshelves. Scanning the shelves now, Belle saw the same well-worn spines and faded titles. It was rare for anything to be added to the inventory. I'm afraid not, he replied. Did that make you sad?
Who's that? What is that?
That he didn't have many books?
Oh, I saw that. I was so sad.
You were so sad?
But I still got to... Well, he didn't take... Well, he never took away my favorite book.
That's good. I'm not afraid. I'm afraid not, he replied. Despite the fact that she had anticipated this, Belle's eyes showed her disappointment. But you may read any of the old ones that you'd like, he added kindly. Belle nodded and moved in front of the shelf. Her fingers brushed the familiar books, most of which she had read at least 2 times. Still, she knew better than to complain. Picking one up, she smiled back at the older man. Thank you, she said softly. Your library makes our small corner of the world almost feel big. Book in hand, Belle left the vestry and made her way back onto the village's main street. Opening the first page... Hop up here, kiddo. She planted her nose firmly in the book and blocked out everything else. She ducked under the cheese vendor carrying his tray of goods and swooped out of the way of the 2 florists, her arms loaded with huge baguettes, all the while never losing her spot on the page. You can walk and read at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
You're good. I can't do that. While she had been disappointed not to find anything new, this book was one of her favorites. It had everything a good story should have. Far-off places, a charming prince, a strong heroine who discovered love, but not right away, of course. Clang, clang. Can you say that?
Clang, clang.
Louder.
Clang, clang.
Thank you. Startled by the noise, Belle finally tore herself from the book. Looking up, she saw that the noise was coming from Agatha. If the town thought Belle was odd, they considered the older woman an outcast. She had no home or family, and spent her days begging for spare change and food.
Oh, I know that's the beggar woman who put the spell on Beast.
You think that's what you think that's what she did?
Yeah, I know that's what she
Well,
did.
we'll find out as we keep reading. Looking past the dirt that covered her cheeks and the rags she wore, Belle had always had a soft spot for Agatha. She felt Agatha deserved as much care and respect as anyone else. and hated to see other villagers ignore Agatha, or worse, mock her among themselves. Whenever she saw Agatha, Belle tried to give her a little something. "Good morning, Agatha," she said now, smiling gently. "I have no money, but here." She reached into her bag, pulled out the baguette she had picked up especially for the older woman, and handed it over. Agatha smiled gratefully. Then her smile turned playful. "No jam?" Anticipating the response, Belle already had her hand in her pocket and produced the jar of jam. "Bless you," Agatha said, lowering her head. She ripped a chunk of the baguette. Belle's presence instantly forgotten. Belle smiled. She felt in some strange way a kind kinship with the woman. Agatha simply wanted to have food and be left alone. Belle was the same way with her books. As lonely as she could be at times, she couldn't stand unwanted attention. Hated it, in fact. And that finishes chapter 1 of what book?
Beauty and the Beast.
From what?
Live action.
That's right. Beauty and the Beast live action. You can get this at your local Barnes and Nobles. You can find it on Amazon, right? It's a good book to read before going to bed?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Is it one of your favorites, Belle? Because it's your movie, right? Exactly. Okay. So that does it for today's episode. Chapter 1. Chapter 2 will be coming, if not this week, next week. Until then, remember, keep reading. Enjoy it. Sit down with your kids. Read anytime they want, right?
Yeah.
All right. Say bye-bye.
Bye.